What is it about jazz music that makes people think of pretty much just one thing? And that's Kenny G. Even though it existed for, really close to 100 years before Kenny G even hit the music scene big, if that's what you want to call it, I guess. It's like me saying that I don't like rock music because I can't stand Nickelback. Does one really bad representation of a style of music define all of it? I don't think so. Well, hear me out here. I truly believe that there's a type of jazz music for everyone. Hi, I'm Rob, and I'm an addict. I'm addicted to jazz music. It tickles my ears and my brain in a way that other types of music just simply can't do. Are you interested in getting into jazz? Well, keep watching. Here's your chance. If you want to know how to get into jazz music, then know this. There's an early and really world-famous jazz clarinetist and saxophonist. His name was Sidney Bechet. He once said, "You gotta be in the sun to feel the sun." It's that way with music too. In order to get into jazz, you have to submerge yourself inside the music and try to feel it. This episode is all about how to get into listening to jazz music. Jazz comes from multiple different influences that came together in the Mississippi Delta region during the late 1800s and early 1900s. There were all these influences of different emerging art forms such as blues, ragtime, African-American folk music, vaudeville, brass bands, and really just pop culture at large at the time. All these cultural and musical influences came together to create this form of music that is really all about improvisation. There's a structure to it, but it's really all about the conversation between these musicians and what they have to say on their instruments. The jazz that we know today, it really started out on the streets, in bars and bordellos in New Orleans, Louisiana. It eventually spread across North America, and it developed into many different branches and subgenres over time. If you really want to take a deep dive into the history of jazz music, there are plenty of books and documentaries out there. I'd suggest starting off with Ken Burns' jazz series that was made for PBS years ago. It's very long. It's a comprehensive history of how jazz came to be what it is today. I tried to get into jazz when I was younger. There were a few things here and there that kind of spoke to me, but for the most part, it all just kind of sounded novelty and sounded like old people music. When I was a teenager in the mid-1990s, I was all into the classic guitar shredders like, Hendrix, Jimmy Page, Eddie Van Halen, and also all of the alternative rock that was coming out during that era. I just really didn't get why people like jazz music. I didn't get jazz. Now, there are a couple things I liked here and there, but, they were all really contemporary versions of swing music like Harry Connick Jr. and Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, all those 90s swing revival bands, the Brian Setzer Orchestra. Then, in my very first year of college in 1998 to 99, I got into jazz choir. I was also a big choir boy growing up, and I was exposed to all these older jazz songs, like also called jazz standards. They were all basically rearranged by modern composers for voice. But that really started to plant the seed and the appreciation for older combo-based jazz and bebop. Then everything changed when I heard this album. It's called Somethin Else by Cannonball Adderley. All I had to do was hear the intro on the very first song on that album, which is Autumn Leaves, and I was instantly hooked. Throughout the years, I learned more and more about jazz, its history, all of its many flavors, which are plentiful. And after taking a deep dive over a long period of time, I realized that the word jazz really paints such a broad stroke, and it's even harder to define. So what is jazz? So jazz, it's not just swing music and horns. People think, the swing rhythm and trumpet and saxophone, that's just jazz basically. But that's just simply too narrow. Jazz is really kind of more defined by the improvisation. That's really at the core. It's musicians creating in the moment. Everything else is kind of secondary. The typical structure, but not always, is, you have the head, which is also the melody. Then you have an improvisational section. And then, you finish it again with the head. It's the composed part that everyone plays together. The middle is where the musicians, they have their solo and really their conversations using notes. The earlier jazz songs kind of took a 32-bar AABA structure for quite a few years until the combo jazz of the 1940s and 50s really started to emerge. But jazz, it breaks its own rules. This isn't always the format. So jazz is incredibly hard to actually define. After 125 years, that term has stretched. What one person calls jazz, someone else might not. The borders are kind of blurry, and I think that's actually a good thing. You can define a lot of songs as jazz that the next listener wouldn't, quite simply put. It's such a broad term now from its inception. This is why people need to broaden their idea of what jazz is. So jazz has just simply been around for longer. You know, like I said, about 100, 125 years, really back to the early 1900s, late 1800s is when it started to really develop. Rock, been around for about 70, 75 years or so. Hip hop, about 50 years. You know, jazz has had more time to evolve and splinter off into all these different styles. Jazz really influenced everything that we listen to today, you know, from rock to hip hop, R&B, funk, electronic music, even pop. If you're listening to modern music, you are hearing jazz DNA. There are so many different styles. And I believe that there is at least one style or subgenre for everyone to enjoy. And that's really the point here. There is something for everyone. You just need to go out there and explore. All right, let me go ahead and give you a list of albums and some artists to explore. Now, not all these would be considered pure jazz by, the purists out there, but they all have jazz elements. And any one of them could be what opens the door for you. After I'm done filming this, I'm going to create a playlist with all these, and I'll put the link in the description down here so you can just click on the playlist and start exploring. It's going to be a wide range of stuff. If you wanted to explore this stuff further, I would suggest by, going on to Wikipedia and seeing the different subgenres of jazz, or jazz by the decade is a good way to go through jazz. But I'm just going to go ahead and give you a list right here of different albums that I would consider to be some jazz classics. I think jazz is best experienced by the album. So first off, I've already mentioned it, and I've mentioned this one in previous videos, the album Somethin Else by Cannonball Adderley. Another one would be Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers album, Moanin'. Herbie Hancock, you have Maiden Voyage, also Headhunters, which is totally different from that one. Then you get into like Miles Davis, who basically helped to reinvent jazz multiple times throughout his career, along with a bunch of other musicians, but people kind of followed what Miles was doing. You got Birth of the Cool, which is early Miles Davis, then Kinda Blue, which is known as one of the best jazz albums of all time, if not the best by many. And then you have kind of more of his experimental groove-based stuff like Bitches Brew. Another one to explore would be Time Out by the Dave Brubeck Quartet. Then you have Midnight Blue by Kenny Burrell. Then one of the greatest jazz guitarists, or actually coming up here, two of the greatest jazz guitarists of all time, Wes Montgomery. Check out the Boss Guitar album. One album that just completely blew my mind the first time I heard it. I thought this guy had like 10 fingers on one hand listening to this. It's a completely solo jazz guitar album. Virtuoso by Joe Pass. If you want to hear a jazz guitar virtuoso, check out that Joe Pass Virtuoso album. Then an album that, I'd heard a couple songs off this album years ago, but I really just kind of dug into this album for the first time within the last 5 years. This was Charles Mingus's album. Then some more modern jazz. A Go-Go by John Scofield. This came out in the late 90s, and he had one of my favorite bands of all time, Medeski Martin & Wood, as his backup band in this one. You can also check out more electric kind of modern jazz album by John Scofield called Uber Jam. And then I'll just get into some artists to check out here, which I'm going to put these in some of these songs in the playlist here. So you have like Medeski Martin & Wood, Charlie Hunter, Christian McBride, Soul Live. Those guys are all more modern jazz artists. Then you have really known as one of the greatest jazz musicians of all time, who was born about 45 minutes away from where I'm recording this, Charlie Parker. He was revolutionary in taking bebop jazz to the next level. Also, another guy who played with Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, is another artist to check out. On guitar, you got Django Reinhardt. Speaking of one of the most influential guitarists of all time, playing with the Benny Goodman Sextet, you have Charlie Christian, who is one of the first, if not the first, electric jazz guitarists. Charlie Christian, not only was he pretty much the first electric guitarist, he laid the foundation for improvisation on guitar by learning all these licks that all the horn players were doing. So check out the Benny Goodman Sextet. And then, a lot of us know this guy, Louis Armstrong, just one of the biggest jazz legends of all time. Moving into some more modern stuff, which some people might not consider jazz, but I do. There's a hip-hop producer named Madlib. And really, a lot of that Madlib stuff is really jazzy. You have the Shades of Blue album, which is on my top 10 favorite albums of the last 25 years that I did in a few videos ago. Madlib is a member of Yesterday's New Quintet. If you haven't listened to Yesterday's New Quintet, that's some good kind of modern jazz, hip-hop adjacent stuff. It's all instrumental jazz, but really, really good, really unique sounding. Then you have, Flying Lotus released this album called You're Dead a while ago. I think that is like the quintessential modern jazz album if you're putting it into the context of today. Some people might not consider that jazz. I absolutely consider that jazz. Then you have a band that I just saw a couple months ago they're all funk, but these guys are all Berkeley jazz guys who started a funk band. Lettuce, one of my favorite bands of all time. I got a lot of favorite bands of all time. Then you have some of this great singers and vocalists of the older jazz era. Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald. Ella Fitzgerald. If I'm into scat. Being a vocalist and loving jazz. Ella Fitzgerald is probably the best scatter out there when it comes to doing that. Louis Armstrong really came up with the whole concept of scat just by accident when he was in a recording session and his music fell off when he was playing trumpet and he started scatting. Ella Fitzgerald took that to the next level. I'm gonna put this artist's song on the list, if not one more than that. But Sarah Vaughan, just one of the silkiest, smoothest female jazz vocalists. Just an amazing alto voice. I'm gonna put the song Black Coffee on this playlist. Billie Holiday, another wonderful jazz vocalist. Then you get into some of the jazz from like the Northeast coast, up in like the New York area. Duke Ellington. Duke Ellington is a piano player and a composer, and man, I could let Duke Ellington roll for days. It's so good, and it's definitely that earlier kind of swing jazz stuff. He played stride piano, where they have these bass notes going back and forth on the piano. But check out some Duke Ellington. Really, really good. Another person from the Kansas City metro area, Count Basie Orchestra. Count Basie Orchestra has some great classic swing music. Then you get into the bossa nova stuff and, different types of Latin jazz. Bossa nova is more Brazilian. Then you have all the Latin jazz from the Caribbean area. But yeah, check out some bossa nova, some Antonio Carlos Jobim. Then you get into like the kind of 70s fusion stuff like Weather Report and Jaco Pastorius. Return to Forever, that had Chick Corea in it, who just passed away not too long ago. You got some of the kind of groove and funk-based 70s stuff, like Grover Washington Jr. I'm going to put one of his songs on the list. Freddie Hubbard, who also played, with like Herbie Hancock, trumpet player. Anyway, there's just, the list goes on and on and on. I'll have to stop it here at some point, but I'll make the playlist below, and I want you to just go and check it out. If you don't like a song, just skip to the next song and see what's on it. There's going to be a wide breadth of music on that. Anyway, before I get into repeating myself too much, this list is just big. Don't let it overwhelm you. Pick one category, based on what you might like or what you may already like, and pick one album or artist from that category and just dive in. Just start. Go out and do some research online or on YouTube. Listen for the improvisation. Listen for that conversation between these musicians and for all of the layers involved with all the different subgenres of jazz. You might not love everything you try, but that's okay. Maybe try it, come back to it later. I don't love everything on this list either, but I guarantee you there's something there, and there's something that's going to click for you and get your toes wet when it comes to really appreciating what jazz music has to offer. That's really what happened to me with Somethin Else, and that's exactly what I want for you. Jazz music has become so special and meaningful for me, and I truly know that there's something out there that will speak to you. So if you get tired of hearing the same old stuff on Spotify or whatever, wherever you listen to it, give jazz a shot, please, for me. There's an endless amount of music to listen to out there. If you like this episode, please do me a favor and give it a like. If you want to see more of what I have planned for this channel, then hit that subscribe button for more stuff like this. I only do music adjacent content on this channel, whether it's educational or more conversational like this. So drop a comment and tell me what you liked or listened to from this list. If there's anyone I left out, which I know that there's a lot of people I left out here, then please say something below. Maybe it'll help someone discover something new. If you want me to do deep dives on specific subgenres or artists, please let me know. All I want is for you to go find your something else. Thanks for hanging around and checking out this video, and as always, I'll see you next time, friends.